Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I'm very excited to welcome our new podcast guest to the show today, and it's Yumay Chang. Hi Yumay, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I'm actually very excited to talk with you about the topic today. But before we jump into all the things, I'd love you to introduce yourself briefly so we know who you are and what you've been up to over the last couple of years.
Sure. So for the last couple of years, I've been managing different sales team in Silicon Valley at companies like Microsoft and Google. More recently, since the pandemic started, I started to run a large support group that's a global support group for people that suffer childhood abuse. The people that I help are all adult survivors, mostly women. The unfortunate thing that I've observed is that if you grew up with trauma, and I was somebody that grew up in that environment, you inevitably, unless you're healed, tend to run into similar situations as an adult. And then that's how the trauma then propagates from generation to generation. And that's something that is deep in my heart that I really want to stop. And I want to make sure that our survivors heal so that we can end the cycle.
Amazing. And what specifically do you do then with that group? Or I think you're also a founder of an organization. What is it called? And how's the involvement?
It's called Life is Love School, and it actually came from a friend of mine who we were having a deep discussion after the breakup of my marriage. And I asked her, what is the meaning of life to you? And she gave what I thought was one of the best answers I've ever heard. She said, I believe that this life is love school, and that every experience in life, whether it's painful or joyful, is an opportunity for us to learn how to love ourselves and how to love other people better. So I've adopted that, and I created the site in her honor. I told her about it, and she was super excited about this.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I actually just got goosebumps when you said that. I think that's really powerful. Cool. All right, so let's jump into the topic. First of all, I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about how you define childhood abuse.
Childhood abuse is anything that if you are a parent, you would not consider ever doing to a child. I think a lot of times we excuse our parents and say, oh, they didn't mean that, or it was just emotional. It was just a put down. They only called me stupid. It wasn't that bad. They did not molest me or beat me up. It was that bad if it's something that you would not do to another child in the presence of other people.
Okay. And I think you also include alcohol in there, right? Because we talked about this in our pre-conversation for the podcast, and you said alcohol is also part of childhood abuse, obviously sexual abuse, verbal abuse. There's a lot of different ways of how we can define it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that abuse manifests itself. A lot of people suffered at the hands of alcoholic parents. People deal with trauma in an unskillful way by, eating, overworking, overexercising, using drugs. Alcohol is another common way. And a lot of parents, the toxic parents that we're talking about, they deal with their emotional regulation issues by using their children. So they blame their children. It's your fault that mommy and daddy are getting a divorce. Or if you just get better grades, we wouldn't be fighting so much. Nobody would ever want to have a child like you. So when you're little and we don't have as much tools and resources available, we take our parents' words for it. And then once we form that belief of I'm worthless, nobody loves me, unless we decide to examine it, it impacts how we see ourselves for the rest of our lives. A lot of the people that either I'm a manager for or I work with, I can see them in their day-to-day work interactions where they're, hey, I have imposter syndrome. I'm not as good as everybody else. And they worry, they lose sleep. They're overly worried about what other people think, what their boss thinks, etc. It's very difficult to live a happy life if you're always comparing yourself to other people, if you're always trying to please other people, if you're trying to measure up, because that standard just changes all the time. And you honestly do not know what other people think anyways. You can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
So the more we peg our happiness and our okayness to things that are outside of our control, the less happy we are. But that's a very natural extension of a less than good childhood.
Very interesting. So I actually just had a podcast interview guest a few weeks ago that talked about imposter syndrome. So I'm really glad that you're bringing that up. And I've never made that connection as well, that maybe people that have had childhood abuse experiences, that they maybe have the phenomenon of the imposter syndrome even more so than maybe other people.
Yes, absolutely true. At Google, they often talk about the fact that, we all have imposter syndrome. We all think that other people are smarter, better, more equipped than we are. Who am I to get hired to this company, etc.?
Mm-hmm.
I call, I don't think that's real.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case. I don't think it has to be the case. I think it is the case for a lot of people, but is it necessary? No. Mm-hmm. Do companies like it when we have imposter syndrome? Sure. Mm-hmm. Bosses love it, right? Because when we have imposter syndrome, guess what? Hey, I need you to work this weekend. Hey, I need you to turn this around tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We will say yes. We will not say no to a lot of things that are absolutely unreasonable. Mm-hmm. Because we basically have no boundaries. We were trained to grow up with no boundaries. Whatever our parents says goes. Our parents have rights, we have no rights. Mm-hmm. And by extension, if we don't examine and heal that part of ourselves, mm-hmm. we grow up, we enter corporations, very easily we slip into that same mindset. The parents now become the boss, or whoever is in an authority position. Just ask yourself how you interact, how you feel, how you behave in front of a person in more authority or in a power position. And you can quite readily see how that mirrors back to your childhood.
Mm-hmm. What was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? And why are you so passionate about this topic today?
I grew up in Taiwan, and back many, many eons ago in Taiwan, there wasn't a support system. So people that suffered, whether it's child abuse or domestic violence, there is just no real resources to go. And in my family, my mom was so trauma bonded to my abusive father. They're both abusive, but my father is a malignant narcissist. And my mother is so deeply trauma bonded to him that she basically gave up on us, gave up on herself. So she would let abuse happen without standing up for us. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there is parentification, which means she became the child, we became the adult. When my sister and I were both very young, she told the two of us that you guys need to one day grow up, make a lot of money, and save mommy. Mm. And when you're a child, you're like, okay, yes, mom, I need to save you. That's my job. Not realizing that, no, it's her job. But this kind of dynamic happens quite a bit in dysfunctional families where the parents become the child. When you think about a parent that beats up a child because they came home from work stressed out, that's the parent acting like a toddler and using their child as an emotional regulation tool. Mm-hmm. So you see this dynamic often where the parents are basically misbehaving, they can't regulate, and they're just stomping their feet, but they do a lot of damage because they're big people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's so powerful that you say that, because I think, for me, that's one of the reasons why every single person in the world should invest in their personal development, because, it's so important to know yourself. So anything that you are dealing with is not, like you said at the beginning when you introduced yourself, is not being given over to the next generation. And if you don't know how to manage your stress levels, your children will not really learn how to manage their stress levels, right? And all of these different things. So I think It's so important that everybody invests in their personal development, not just when they feel like they are stressed out, but in general, right? How did you heal your inner child?
So for me, the journey took quite a while, and that's why I created a workshop. I don't want people to have to go through what I had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I wasted years not realizing that just because I'm physically apart from my parents, I'm no contact with my father for now 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very, very sporadic contact. I'm talking about once, maybe a year with my mother, who's also toxic, unfortunately. So even with that little bit of contact, it doesn't mean that things are just better, magically better, just because of distance, physical distance.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? I carry the trauma in me.
Mm-hmm.
So I carry the inner critic in me. Whatever false belief, whatever terrible things they said to me, I carry it with me. I remember it, right? It's already inside of me. So not realizing that I have to heal that, I wasted a lot of time. And I hear this voice, which is, I think everybody has a little voice that's in their head. Some people have a more benign voice, but a lot of people have this very critical voice, which is saying, you're not good enough. You need to do more. You need to bend over backwards a little bit more so that people would like you. You are nothing without whatever you can accomplish. So I heeded that voice for a long time. Right. That started by saying, well, you're not safe until you become a US citizen, because if you're not a citizen, you could get kicked back all the way back to Taiwan anytime else, because if you don't have your own house, guess what? It's not safe. So it's repeated this kind of message of once you get there, you'll finally be okay. Mm-hmm. Then when you get there, that yardstick moves again. It keeps moving. You're just always within, it feels like it's within reach, but it's never reachable. Mm-hmm. And it took the dissolution of my marriage for me to realize, okay, I can't find a love of myself outside of myself. It cannot come from anything that could be on a resume, because whatever could be on a resume, it can disappear one day. Even a CEO has to retire. Mm-hmm. And it cannot come from somebody else, because guess what? That somebody else could leave, that somebody else could die. So ultimately, I needed to figure out a solution inside. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning of the awakening, and also to realize that it can't be anybody else. Like, I have to fix myself. For years, I thought, okay, the therapist is going to fix me, right? That's what I paid in for. My parents, once they apologize, okay, that's going to be the moment. Mm-hmm. When they apologize and they can fix me. Guess what? That's still me as a child. I've regressed to a child to say that somehow this person who is so damaged that they would abuse their own child can turn around and magically fix me. When you write it down in a journal, you'll realize how ridiculous this thought process is. But when it's not conscious, I know a lot of survivors have this in their mind. Like, I must have this person who abused me, whether it's a husband or a parent, I must have them apologize. Otherwise I can't get better. Mm-hmm. If you have that mindset, you'll be spending the rest of your life waiting for that person to save you, and they might never be able to. They simply do not have the capacity or the willingness. Mm-hmm. So you have to take control back. That's step number 2, right? Then I wasted more time on that. And then step number 3 is, I think, where even if you conquer the first 2 steps, step number 3 is, okay, exactly what do I need to do to love myself more? Like, everybody says, oh, you got to love yourself more. If you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. How do you do that? I've asked therapists after therapists, and they're like, oh, no, it's easy. You're lovable because you exist. Mm-hmm. I'm like, is that what you tell a person who their own parents abuse them? That doesn't work. I can't just snap and like, oh, all of a sudden I feel immense self-love. That doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And that's where I spend a majority of my time, just trial and error to figure out what actually works. Mm-hmm. So that's what I teach people now, because I feel like the same reason that you get a personal trainer or you get a career coach, there's no reason to struggle and waste a lot of time, especially since people really suffer. Like, when I was suffering, I couldn't sleep. I would get like 4 hours of sleep, and it's intermittent sleep. Mm-hmm. I'd wake up repeatedly at night, and that went on for decades. Like, mm-hmm. There is no reason for anybody to have to go through that.
Yeah. Okay, I think now everybody is very curious to hear a little bit more about what kind of tools helped you the most to find self-love, or how
Gosh,
did
there
you
are
build
so
it,
many
or
because everybody's like asking me, is there just one silver bullet? I think anyone, any coach, any therapist, any doctor that tells you like, oh yeah, just take this pill or,
Mm,
just do this retreat and all of a sudden you're going to get better, they're lying to you.
mhm,
And I think we're all smarter than that now, right? Because we've all watched videos, we've read books, etc. There is no one silver bullet. There's a lot of lead bullets. And where I think people are missing is they don't need more information. They need to practice.
mhm,
Everybody knows beyond a doubt, because science has shown that, right? Double-blind research, controlled trials, meditation works. Meditation builds prefrontal cortex. How many people actually do it? And why do people not do it? And
mhm,
that's what I'm trying to solve with the program that I'm running. I call it Made to Shine, because I believe that everybody is here to made to shine. And we're literally spending the rest of our life trying to return to who we were as a child. Because I remember what I felt like when I was a child. I was completely present. I could just be like watching ants. I'm
mhm.
talking about hours, not having a thought of worry, not thinking about the future or any past, right? I'm completely in the present. I think all of us were like that as a child. You probably remembered that of yourself as a child. And we just spend the rest of our life trying to do accomplishments, but nothing that we want is more than just to return who we were before.
Mhm.
Isn't that kind of interesting?
It is very interesting, yeah. So meditation is one thing.
Meditation is huge.
Okay.
And the question is, why are you not doing it? If you know it's important, why are you not doing it? Especially for trauma survivors. And the reason I say this is because when we suffer trauma, especially at a young age, in the developmental phase, when our brain is still growing and is very vulnerable, trauma actually changes our brain on a physiological level. So when people say, oh yeah, that was in the past, why don't you just freaking snap out of it? These people do not understand science.
Yes.
They
Okay.
are not scientists. So if you compare people that have suffered traumatic events as a child, their amygdala is much more sensitive,
Mhm.
which translates to why adult survivors have a much higher rate of any kind of disease, from heart disease to chronic pain.
Yes.
It's
And
just
I'm going to
because,
stop you there for a second, because why is
sure.
it? It's because their stress levels are elevated, right? Because our amygdala is our amygdala basically gets hijacked when we are in a stressful situation, and the amygdala is responsible for regulating emotions. And so if you are very sensitive to emotions because of the experience that you had, you have elevated stress levels that then, create, what you just said, heart diseases, like all different kinds of physiological experiences and symptoms.
Yeah, stress is bad in multiple sense, right? Without stress, we'd be laying in bed. That's not good
Mhm.
either. So when we wake up in the morning, cortisol level rises to get us out of bed. That's all good. What I'm talking about is a toxic level stress. It's chronic at 9 p.m. at night when you're supposed to have your melatonin rise. Instead, these people, and I was one of them, have your cortisol level rise instead. So the experience would be you're lying in bed, all of a sudden, right? You're super tired. You can't wait to go to bed. All of a sudden, you're fully awake.
Mhm.
That's when things are out of whack. And cortisol level, when it's too high, it actually damages your prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is this part of our brain at the very front that is basically, prefrontal means ahead, even ahead of what's in front. So it is the last layer of our human brain from an evolutionary perspective to be developed. And that's what makes us human. It is when I feel so angry, I'm ready to kill that person. Prefrontal cortex said, take a step back. You're going to go to jail. Maybe we should have a conversation. So if we have prolonged stress and it actually erodes our prefrontal cortex, guess what? It's just a negative feedback cycle where it can no longer overcome the signals from the amygdala and the mammalian brain, which is a level in. That's a more primitive emotional side, as you pointed out.
Mhm.
It just becomes worse. But we can reverse the cycle because we are humans. Animals cannot. Animals don't have something called self-directed neuroplasticity, which is something that I focus a lot. Another aspect of what I do is I teach people self-directed neuroplasticity. That's a blessing of having this human life, is that we could change our thought. And by changing our thought, we change our brain. The two of them are a feedback loop, right? If we just think from our damaged brain, the traumatized brain thinks traumatized thoughts. We get more worried, it raises cortisol level, kills off more brain cells on the front, gets our amygdala more sensitive. We go into negative loop. We could turn it around by saying, for example, do gratitude practices. Right? Think about all the things that we appreciate, all the people that we love, all the love we've ever received, even if it were sporadic. Let's focus on that feeling, because our body and our mind cannot distinguish the difference between what we imagine and what is actually happening. If you don't believe this, just think about like, oh, I'm about to bite into a lemon.
I'm just smiling here. I'm sorry. You're probably like, oh, Julia's just smiling, but I'm so glad that you're sharing this. This has been a process that I've been going through over the last 5 months very, very intensely, because I've had a very emotional experience last year, and I've been focusing a lot on meditation and manifestation, and it's exactly what I've been learning a ton about. So to have you on the podcast and actually describe it is really wonderful for me. So just keep on going.
Yeah, of course. It's super exciting. I remember at the very low point, since you were mentioning manifestation, which kind of is, the popular thing, law of attraction, The Secret. I think that's all very important. And it ties into, whether it's mirror work or affirmations. On the other hand, again, it's a feedback cycle. So I had a friend who was out of job for a while. And whenever I talk to her, she's like, oh, I'm working on my vibrations, which to her, it meant I'm working on mirror work. I'm doing affirmations, the dream job that I want is within my reach. But then when I asked her, so what steps are you taking to get that dream job? There is nothing. So I think where a lot of these gurus, affirmation gurus, are missing is just affirmation, just thinking. Abundance alone is not enough. That has to trigger you to take actions, because actions then breeds confidence. Sitting there does not breed confidence. And that's why in the workshop that I have, again, I have a huge focus, being an engineering manager, like huge focus on results. Yeah. And results isn't talk. Results is doing things and having accountability. So I pair people into groups, because research, the Harvard study shows, and I completely believe this, just based on what I've seen with ladies in my workshop, is when you have an accountability partner, your goal goes from a 10% success rate, like, oh, I'm going to, incorporate mindfulness in 2021. It jumps to 95%. And this is literally the AA method, which is, I'm going to, hey, Julia, you and I are partners now. We're going to call each other at 8 p.m. every night. Like, it could be as simple as, did you meditate today? How do you feel? Right? The answer could be yes or no. Yeah. And you're just peers, but just knowing that there's somebody that's going to ask you that question. Doesn't that change? Doesn't that do something so for powerful. You? Like,
100.
Like very powerful.
It's actually the same. I actually share this many times in like my videos and my podcast as well, this number, because I just think it's so powerful of what an accountability buddy can do for you. And for me, one of the things that I'm thinking about right now as well is that I was never majorly into meditation, actually, even though I'm a stress management coach and I know that meditation is one of the tools on how to regulate stress. I always said to people, you don't have to meditate if you don't want to, because it's okay. There's other tools that you can do. And it had to come in my personal experience, to a very obviously breaking point for me to be like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get better and feel better. And I started to invest in meditation. And now I meditate like an hour a day at least.
That's amazing.
And it's had such an amazing power on my healing process over the last 5 months. And about, just the awareness of how negative my thoughts were, and now, I can stop myself in the tracks and I can really work on, positivity and how do I actually want to feel. Now, when I talk with people about my future and, like what I want to bring into my life, it's already there. Like that's the manifestation work of it, right? It's like, I experience it already as if it has already happened, because that's like part of the manifestation. And the other thing that I want to say is that I've actually done a lot of forgiveness meditations as well, because, and I do talk about forgiveness in my program as well, and also in a lot of my podcasts, because I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle of being resilient, of having a strong mindset, of being a peak performer. Because if you think that you need to wait for another person to say I'm sorry, you'll always give your power to somebody else, and you will always be the victim instead of taking your life into your own hands. And again, at the moment when I'm going through my forgiveness meditations and I have like negative thoughts throughout the day, it's so at the beginning, how they always say, right? Like, and it's been requiring so much action, but over the last, like the shift of like where I was 5 months ago to where I am today, that when a negative thought comes up, how aware I am in the moment of, oh, I don't want to think that. And I'm just literally like releasing the thought and I'm like replacing it with something positive. It takes so much time and so much focus and concentration, but once you get to that point, it feels so empowering to think I can actually create my life and I can create how I want to feel on a daily basis is incredible.
Yeah, I think you put it beautifully. And people oftentimes ask, why is meditation so powerful?
Mm-hmm.
Besides the fact that it's scientifically known to increase your gray matter here, prefrontal cortex, we all need more.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a good training for letting go. Because when you think about forgiveness, a lot of survivors are like, oh no, I can't forgive them. What they did was unforgivable. That's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
What my parents did to my siblings and I were unforgivable.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you can also interpret forgiveness as it's just too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
I need to cut the emotional cord. It's for me. I don't want to be tied to these people emotionally, energetically anymore. I don't want to spend any more cycle thinking about them.
Mm-hmm.
And where meditation is an amazing practice for letting go is the practice is not in the, oh, there's no thought in me. Oh, this is amazing. 5 minutes, no thought. It's actually to bring back. It's what they call start anew.
Mm-hmm.
I went to this meditation retreat in Chile in the middle of nowhere, and my Spanish is horrible, but I just remember the teacher kept saying, I think it's comenzar a nuevo, basically start anew.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about, oh my God, I can't believe my mind just went to something else. I'm so horrible. I'm such a horrible meditator. No, it's gently saying, oh, it went away. Bring it back to the breath. Bring it back to the breath. So it's constantly letting go of thoughts. And then over time, you become very good at letting go of thoughts, right? Because when you think about the thoughts that we think about every day, apparently it's like roughly 50,000. And 80% of them, 40,000 of them are negative.
Mm-hmm.
Our mind just has a very strong negative bias. So having the ability to constantly and fairly lightweight, fairly easily, without self-recrimination, to be able to just drop those thoughts, that is a freaking superpower. Yeah. And by having that ability and then even take it a step further to redirect it towards something that's positive, that we're grateful for, etc., that is constantly rewiring our brain. Because you probably heard a phrase called neurons that fire together, wire together, right?
Yeah.
That's why some people are happier. Their default state is happier, mm-hmm. because their pathway for happiness is the superhighway.
Right there. Yeah.
Right. And their pathway for negativity is like a tiny alley in Italy. Mm-hmm. Whereas, people that feel more negative, depressed are the other way. And unfortunately, if we had a challenging childhood, we got exercised a superhighway to fear, a superhighway to hypervigilance. What are they going to do to me? So we need to do some extra work to reverse that. And it's very reversible.
Yeah, it is.
We need to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Super fascinating. So, okay, I do want to ask you again, because I think it's super, super powerful. So you said basically the tools that you've been using in order to create self-love is really literally to to rewire your thoughts, right? And from a neuroscientific perspective through meditation. I've heard gratitude practice. Is there anything else?
Gosh, the list is probably, I have, well, in the workshop that I create, it's probably like a list of at least 50, 60 tools. Okay. And they all tackle different things. Like when I work with the ladies, I have a sense of like today's session is going to be about healing your inner child. But the actual homework that I prescribe is based on the situation they run into. So if they share like, oh, this is a situation, my mother wants me to talk with her like, too often, or this person is very toxic, how do I handle it? I would then prescribe different exercises just because I know so much over the years. All of them are different doors. Let's just say that you're somebody who sits in a cave for 10 years and you practice like the Dalai Lama, you'll get there, but it'll take 10 years. And it's not very entertaining either. It's not the way that I prefer to learn. But different tools generally point to the same thing. Whether you do gratitude exercise or you do affirmations or you do meditation, it will all heal you. But when you can put multiple tools at the same time, especially if it's directed at the situation that you have right now, I think that's the shortest path. And that's what I try to do for people.
Very nice. Great. Amazing. And so you've already mentioned it a little bit actually, but I'd love to go a little bit further into this topic of where do you think, or what is the link between people that have experienced childhood abuse in the past and their performance at work?
So what I've observed is that if you experience childhood abuse and your coping mechanism is flight, that means that you escape into work, exercise, whatever. If you're not a drinker, you might be an overworker. Overworking and being a perfectionist will take you pretty far. I'm speaking from experience, right? You'll get A grades, you go to a good school, you'll graduate, you get a good job. But at certain points, you're going to encounter a wall where you're going to drive yourself crazy. The people that do really well in the long run are people that see life more lightly. They also see it as a marathon. They're like, okay, fine. If you're going to fire, do anything external to them. And that's super important for longevity and just personal peace and balance.
Yeah. And I think you already mentioned the piece about the imposter syndrome. So I thought that was super, super powerful and interesting as well, that there's that link between childhood abuse, no boundaries. We talked about it actually in the podcast as well. In the podcast interview with Melody Wilding, we talked about why it is so important to set these boundaries. And I think you just reinforced that again. So I'm really glad that you did that.
Yeah, can I add a piece about the imposter syndrome? So I feel like it's a huge miss that some of these companies pride the fact that their employees feel a strong sense of imposter syndrome. They said, oh yeah, everybody feels that way because we're such an awesome company. That's why everybody's fearful. No. The job of the company should be helping people feel safe and feeling calm, not toting the fact that this is a testament to how awesome the company is. No, it's not. It's actually the opposite. People do their best work when they feel safe. If they don't feel safe, they spend a lot of emotional energy in trying to be safe. They're hyper vigilant. They're watching what their bosses think. They're not being creative. All this energy that could have been directed outwards towards serving customers and creating better products is directed inwards, freaking out and not sleeping at night. It's not actually productive.
Yeah. Did you, on your path and on your journey, did you have any books or obviously you said you worked a lot with therapists and you've gained an array of tools to help you to rediscover self-love. Is there anything that really shaped you, that like maybe a book or something where you were like, wow, I read this and it really opened my eyes, or maybe multiple books, like it doesn't have to be one?
Yeah, I think for me, the big eye opener, I read about 2 books a week, and I've been doing that since I was a child. But I think one book that is fascinating to me, and it's not just because it influenced me deeply, but because the reactions differ so much from person to person, is the book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
I love this book.
It's really fascinating. When my sister and I read it, we're like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting, right? It really hit a chord. I remember when I was reading it, I was going through a difficult phase in my life where I felt a lot of anxiety. And when I read it, it's like, all of a sudden, all the anxiety left me. But then of course it came back. There was no lasting change. And that's what I'm trying to help people is doing lasting change. These are like kind of like moments of waking up,
Well,
moments
it's
of
also
pause.
because when you read, it's like you said, right? It's like learning, but then to practice what he's basically saying of being in the present moment at all times, that's a practice. Like that's so hard, right? Because we just get caught up in our day-to-day lives and it's just so hard to stay in.
Yeah, I think what all these books, including therapy, is missing is the practice. Like I remember so many times I've had excellent therapists. I would go in feeling distressed, walking out pretty happy, but it doesn't last, right? And every time I'd be like, what book would you like me to read? That doesn't help. What practices should I do? Is there any homework? There's none. I don't think that is in traditional therapy part of the curriculum to give your clients exercises, take home exercises and check their homework. They don't do that. I wish that they did.
Yeah.
Because that would be so much more powerful.
That we do it as coaches. Like I think
That's right.
that's why the coaching business and category has just blown up so much, because it works, because people have accountability buddies and they need to take action until the next time they talk with their coach, you know. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been such a powerful thing. I'm sure you've read this book as well, but I'm going to ask you, but since you're reading so many books, I'm sure you've read it. The Deepest Acceptance by Jeff Foster.
I haven't read that one. That's really interesting.
You should put it on your list.
My list. It's funny. I've had situations where people are like, oh, have you read blah, 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 blah. I was like, I haven't. And then I go into my Audibles, like I have years ago. I just forgot.
Yeah. Check that one out. I really love that book. I'm reading at the moment The Big Leap as well by Gary Hendricks, or Gay Hendricks. Also really, really interesting. It's all kind of interlinked. And then because you talked a lot about the brain, out of curiosity, and my listeners know that I love him so much, I always bring him up. Joe Dispenza. Have you read any of his work?
I have, yeah.
Like that's like
he has a lot of the YouTube videos as well.
Exactly. And that's most of the meditations actually that I do as well. I'm from Joe Dispenza. So definitely has strongly influenced my life as well. How does your daily routine look like to support your mental health and, just the practice, right? The practice of always working on ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually something I emphasized with my ladies yesterday. We had our weekly live call. And I told him, I look at my husband, he's a very joyful, he's very happy in general, like above average happy based on psychological tests. But I look at him, and this is a guy who had good enough parents, right? There are no perfect parents, good enough parents, a good childhood. And yet every day he wakes up at 5 a.m. So he wakes up on time, and then he would journal, he would read, and he would exercise, and he would meditate.
Okay.
I used to have this belief that, oh my God, poor me, because I was so damaged that I have to do all this extra work. I was very resentful of it. And I felt like it was a tremendous burden on my time. And then I see this person who is very balanced, very well functional executive, and he does this every day. And that was a big wake up moment for me, that nothing comes easy. Nothing is free. If you care about it, you got to put your time on it. I was having a conversation with a really dear friend of mine. I just love her to death, but she's also working herself to death. The two of us are kind of like mirror images of each other. I was exactly like her, maybe many years ago. And I asked her, what's important to you? She's like, oh, well, first of all, it's my kids. And then it's my relationship with my husband, and then my own health, and then work. And I said, well, how are you spending your time? It's almost in the exact opposite direction. Right. So that's why it's really important. I do very similar to what my husband does. He's more regimented than I am. But one thing I always do is I journal and I plan a day. Because if I don't plan a day, what can happen is procrastination kicks in. It kicks in hard for people that are perfectionists, which is a lot of times counterintuitive, because we have to do it so perfect that we have to wait for the perfect moment where I feel perfect and look perfect before I can start. I've always thought about doing like a YouTube video, but every day I look at myself, I'm like, today I don't look perfect. I don't sound perfect. I can't go on that perfect camera today. Right? Like, how often do we hold ourselves back by this notion of perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
And can we make 2021 a year where we say, okay, let's just give ourselves permission to do whatever we want to do and just do it messy, because nobody cares.
Yeah. How can people connect with you and join your program?
They can find me on the website lifeisloveschool.com, and then everything else is there. If you're lonely, I highly recommend you join the Facebook group. It's private. There's a lot of us there, and the discussion is always very positive. I actually started the work by blogging and running that support group because I see too many support groups, God bless their heart, but they go into this cycle of what is the worst thing that your parents ever did to you? Right? It's fine to commiserate once in a while, but if the conversation stays there, it goes back to our conversation about.
And sorry, I'm just laughing again because it just makes me think of my therapist that said to me 2 or 3 weeks ago that there's something like healthy denial. And she's like, it's great that you're doing the work and it's great that, you're looking at all of these things. But she's like, it's also really important to sometimes not, just think about all the terrible things, but like have healthy denial and just distract yourself and be positive and invest in the good things in life, So I'm glad that you're saying
absolutely. Because every moment that we're alive, we're shaping our brain structurally by the thoughts that we think.
Yeah.
So be very careful. You got to take care of your brain by thinking good thoughts, and a good thought. Sometimes it's just too difficult, right? I'm depressed in bed. I can't get out to think, oh yeah, I'm a Wonder Woman. I can do anything. That's too big of a leap, but you can always think a slightly better thought, right? To start with, for example, every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. I can master this with strategy and with effort, right? These are all very reasonable things you can tell yourself that shifts your thought process to a slightly higher vibration.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, Yumay, this was such a wonderful conversation. I'm really, really glad that we finally found the time to talk about this together. I want to do a really quick plug-in as well, because my Peak Performance Method program is starting the next round of research on February 8th. And actually, all of the tools that we talked about today, values, self-care, routines, time management, setting boundaries, resilience, mindset, forgiveness, those are the 9 components actually of the Peak Performance Method. So you can learn these tools, and we are a support group in order to help each other get to sustain that performance level. So if you're interested to learn more, I would love to have you. So feel free to check out the links that are in the show notes. And I hope to see you and hear you soon, Yumay, and also, of course, my listeners in one of the next podcast episodes. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia.